right, doing research with people who are in other cultures, particularly relevant actually in the United States. You don't have to leave the United States to come across a lot of different cultures, including this room. Doing research with people who do not share your culture, and again, these can be people who are living in the same environment in which you live. At UNC Chapel Hill, lots of research with undocumented workers, or it could be people who live elsewhere. A friend of mine does most of his work in Democratic Republic of Congo. Doing research with other cultures is like everything we know about doing ethical research in general, but on steroids. We have all the usual issues about doing ethical research, but there is a context that redefines those usual issues by casting them in a new light, and there are some additional issues that are added to the mix. The slides you already have printed out there cover everything I'm going to say now, plus some extra that you can read on your own. Those slides are a good demonstration of how you shouldn't do slides when you're in education, right? Too many words on the page and so on. So, doing research with participants in a culture not your own means knowing what you already know, but knowing it differently. So, first, culturally competent research. 3 dimensions to consider. Research is culturally competent when you consider these 3 factors. The first is what is investigated, because what is culturally relevant in one culture may not be relevant in another. My own area of research particularly is on self-disclosure. Self-disclosure in the United States, especially in interpersonal relationships, is a really important topic. You go to some other cultures, it's not as important. I gave a talk on self-disclosure in Lithuania, and they looked at me like I came, let me see, from the United States. All right. So the question there with what is investigated is, how does your culture dictate what is important to study? And what does the culture you're entering think is important to study? And how do those relate to each other? Then how something is investigated. Do the people in the culture you're studying have the same perspective of your methods as you do? My favorite example of this has to do with consent forms. Even though we write these things on our websites about consent forms and you need signed consent, and there are exceptions. Just let us know. Got a call from a graduate student in Russian, and he was going to Russia to do research. And why did he call? Because he was terrified, because he didn't know how to create the consent form that the people he would be interviewing in Russia could sign. Think about that for a second. Signing a consent form and you're in Russia. That's like, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. He knew that if he had to have signed consent, he would have no participants. And when I told him, just make the argument for why oral consent will work, and that's okay, he was very relieved. And then how the findings are interpreted. The interesting question here is, how would the people in the culture that you're in collecting the data, how would they interpret your findings? Would they interpret your findings the way you do? And along the same line, how does your culture influence how you interpret your findings? This is what I meant about And cultural knowledge, what you learn about the culture, and we learn about cultures in varieties of ways. And cultural sensitivity. And the three together lead to cultural competence. Doing research with people, I had mentioned at the very beginning that it's lots of the things we already think about, but there are some things that in addition to think about. I'll just mention three. The first is, do we research another culture because we can? In which case the participants in the other culture are irrelevant except as vehicles, right? Tools for us to answer our research questions. Probably the easiest example of this is when a drug company tests HIV drugs in Africa because they can and may not feel any particular obligation to the culture, such as supplying drugs if they find that they're efficacious. Or are we doing research with another culture because we actually care about that culture, which is what Susan will be talking about? Do we have research questions that require us to be in that other culture? I was once in a group that was gerontologists, and we went around the room and said, why are you interested in doing, study here? And remember, I had said I do research on self-disclosure. And so I gave a bad answer. I said, I don't really care about the fact that all of these people are in their 80s and 90s. What I care about is the self-disclosure. And someone in the group said, wrong answer. That's like doing research in another culture. Why are you there? Are you there because you can be, like Lawrence was in that group? Or are you there because it's the culture? Second point, is the culture silenced as we do our research? Does the researcher become the voice for that culture? And then third, and actually my introduction to this concept comes from notions of speciesism, are participants in the particular culture in some way unequal to us as researchers? Do we consciously or unconsciously see ourselves as privileged? And if we do see ourselves as privileged, then are we benefiting from violating their rights? Hang on. As I like to say at a moment like this, I was born before television was popular. We were the first family on our block to have a television set. So you understand how all this, so this just annoys the crap out of me. Does anyone else? Is there a 14-year-old here?
Oh, your slides are not on here.
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
Yeah, I thought that his slides are on this computer, but it's not.
Well, you have it in front of you, so
Can
I'll...
you move it?
All right. See, we need a 14-year-old. All right. Regardless. The slides are numbered. The fifth slide that you have there, these considerations are included in a broad question, which is, does culturally competent research have an obligation to the culture studied? Or posed as a statement, researchers must explicitly identify how the research findings will benefit the community and its members. Put differently, what is the obligation, if there is any obligation, of the researcher to the culture being studied? Is the researcher ripping off the culture by not giving back something? And I'm serious, I'm not being sarcastic. And does that question matter? Good. All right. Wait. The next one. Thank you very much. All right. I'm from the school of, please give me something practical. Give me something to think about. So in preparing, I said, okay, 15 recommendations, considerations. There's no magic in the number 15. It was late, and I got to 15, and I said, that sounds like a lot. 15 recommendations or considerations for culturally competent research methods. There are a few slides. I'm just going to do the first two on each as an idea about how to read these at your leisure. I'll turn them into questions. So like with the first one, do you need to obtain endorsement from community leaders? Because there it's obtain endorsement, but sometimes you'll be in a culture where you don't need to be doing that. But the question always needs to be asked. And the second one, do you need to consider using culturally sensitive approaches regarding confidentiality? All right, the next slide. Good. Thank you. Do you need to use and train culturally competent interviewers? And that goes with the next question, do you need to use bilingual staff? Bilingual and culturally competent are not the same. Culturally competent, lots of training. Bilingual, you go to another department on your campus and pick up someone for $10 an hour. And the next one. All right. Do you need to be alert to culturally biased measurements, instruments? And then the more important question, does the measure developed in your culture, both the concepts and how you measure them, have the same value and meaning in another culture? And the easy example of this is, you put a Likert scale from 1 to 7 with never and always in front of a student in the United States, and the odds are you don't have to say anything. It's done. Try doing that in other cultures in general, and they look at that and they, I've gotten this. It was, what the hell is this? And then I try to explain Likert scale, and they say, okay, but then what does a number 2 mean? And I knew at that point I lost. All right, the bottom line. The bottom line is the bottom line, and that is that research that is culturally competent will, by definition, be ethical. Thank you.